Okay, we're live.
Okay, hi, this is Rocky. You found OnCall, and we're here with you every Sunday evening, about at the same time, obviously. And we like to say that we're an alternative online church type experience. So we're really just a program uh, for now on YouTube, and we're just talking about a kind of a combination of current events and then biblical principles and truths. And we just weave them together in a way that helps people, tries to help make people make sense out of what's going on in life. So, anyway, thanks for joining us today. Lori is producing for us down in the Great Southwest. Hi, Lori.
Hello.
And we're going to have a couple of news items today, and then we're going to jump right into scripture. And then we have a guest today. We're going to be talking with Vice President of Human Resources in Oklahoma, and a good friend of mine. And he's going to come on. We're going to talk about recovery and just see what kind of insights we can pull out of him on how to help people recover from all sorts of things, but especially believers. This program is, we're concerned about believers that are going through things and trying to follow God and go on with God. So tonight's program is on recovery. We're going to talk about some secrets of how you can recover. And so, Lori, why don't you take it away with the news items?
Sure. I'm going to bring up the first article here, which is from faithwire.com. And the title is A Crisis of Despair. Christian mental health professional reveals the reason behind recent surge in suicides and drug-related deaths. And it's written by this woman, Carly Hoylman, who's talking about this trend in suicides, and what she's saying is at the root of suicide, alcohol and drug abuse is the affliction of despair, and how despair is, experiencing an uptick in America as people are losing hope and, despairing of the future. And then she goes on to, what they did was they consulted with this woman who is a licensed professional counselor at Dallas Theological Seminary, Carly Graham. And she starts talking about stigma, which is a big thing in mental health, and it's that the stigma around mental health, people who are mentally healthy, perceive people that have issues with mental health as a sort of weakness or a lack of strength. And so a lot of times it's like, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps sort of thing, when in reality, mental illness is a very serious thing, and if people could help themselves, they would. The whole point of it is they just can't see a way out of it. And then it goes on to talk about the need for community, and how self-isolating makes it worse, and things like that. And I think this is where the church comes in, and other believers, is that need for community, is that if we can have an experience of trust, we can at least talk about what we're going through and not experience the isolation, and then maybe even find some hope.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting today that we're having an upsurge in anxiety, but yet it's like people don't know about it. I guess they do, but they don't. And as a pastor, a preacher, whatever, I don't notice it as much. I wouldn't say that I notice that people are struggling with discouragement, things like that, as much as the stats say that they are, but they do. So that's why we got Joel here, and Joel's going to come in a minute. Actually, Joel Dougherty, he's the vice president I was talking to you about earlier. He's a friend of mine. I've known him since he was 12 years old, and he was ministering this morning, Lori, kind of along these lines. And I'm actually looking at him right here, but he was ministering along these lines. So it's interesting. I just realized as you were reading that article how much what he had to say today kind of correlates with this. So we'll get his firsthand, take on some of this stuff.
Mm. Well, we all know that there's a very serious problem with despair and suicide with veterans. It's actually at a crisis level. So people that come back from seeing live action, they have a very hard time getting back into the swing of living a quote unquote normal life.
And that's become pretty normal in our culture because we've been kind of in a war scenario for so many years.
Right. Yeah.
And
Most of the, the young people today, I mean, we've been fighting wars for, I don't know, what, 15 years or something like that, something crazy.
you're pretty much straight. And then before that, like several wars before that, I mean, think about Vietnam and Korean War, all the way back to last century and all the wars then. It's funny because Joel's also was in the Navy, so maybe he's got a take on that too that he can help us with. Now, Lori, was the article you read there, it's connected to the second article, right? That's talking about stats in the church?
Yes. Yep. So I'm on the second one now, Rocky, if you want to talk about that one.
Yeah, go ahead, because they kind of go together.
Okay, so this one, it was another study by the Barna Group, and that may sound familiar to folks because we've referenced one of those studies before, in partnership with Pepperdine University, looking into lives of American pastors. And so, they interviewed more than 14,000 Protestant pastors from 40 denominations that span the political spectrum. And it talks about, so the good news is that most pastors are faring well with overall quality of life, but it talks about there's a very good, there's a very large percentage that are experiencing mental health struggles as well, and also other things. But it says almost half have faced depression, while 1 in 5 pastors has struggled with addiction.
Yeah, that's somewhat surprising to me too, although not as much maybe as the other one. But I never think about my pastor friends as struggling with depression. I know we all just go through things. So I'm wondering today, like, how much of this is depression? How much of it is just a kind of depression that goes along with, the technology and, the social media and all the stuff that we have going on around us today. So
I would put out there that that people just don't talk about it. Because my personal experience is that once I get close enough to someone that there's some level of trust where you start sharing, I'm finding that almost everybody I meet has suffered with some sort of depression or anxiety, it seems.
Right. Yeah, I think going back to Joel's message this morning, it seemed like it was really well received by the people in our congregation. And that tells me that, people are in touch with this more than I realize. Maybe I'm the one that's out of touch. But that's kind of the reason for talking about this, is because I think a lot of people are like me. I think they don't realize that that's actually what's happening to people, because we seem more connected than ever, right? With all the social media, we don't see it as an isolating culture that we live in, but somehow it turns in on itself, and it is isolated, and people are isolated.
Right.
And then struggling with all sorts of feelings of, anxiety and whatever. So one thing I know is, the base calling of Jesus was to come and help people recover. It says in Luke chapter 4, Jesus himself, when he's baptized by John in the River Jordan, and he just enters into his ministry. And so he comes from that setting back up to his hometown in Nazareth. And the Bible says here in verse 16, he stands up, he goes in the synagogue, stands up on the Sabbath day to read. And they deliver him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And he opens the place where it's written, and he begins to quote Isaiah and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives." And then this phrase, recovery of sight to the blind. So recovery is a key theme throughout the scripture. In fact, that's what Jesus came to do. Redemption is all about recovery. And so his whole reason for coming was to die for us and to die as us, and then through his resurrection, to resurrect us up out of this old life, this old nature that happened to us because of the fall in the garden, up into his life, his nature. And so recovery is just a huge part of that. Of course, it goes on to say, to set at liberty them that are bruised. I wondered when my thing was going to come on, so I don't know if you heard that, Laurie, but just now my mute button came on. So to set at liberty them that are bruised, and then to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So there's 7 things listed there that kind of are under the umbrella of Jesus' anointing, to what Jesus is empowered to do. And at the very heart of it, they all touch on some sort of recovery. So I'm gonna bring Joel in. Joel, again, Vice President of Human Resources. You got to roll in here with me.
Roll in the chair, yeah.
And we're in the corner of my office today, and so I think we can have a good discussion. Joel, what do you got to say about just any or all of these things, whether it's news items or the scriptural truths that we were talking about?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So my background is in psychology. My undergraduate degree is in psychology, and my graduate degree is in industrial psychology, which is the psychology of work. Right. So the two articles that Lori mentioned, I was nodding my head because that is absolutely true. So the first article discussing kind of what the statistics are and how that might be surprising. I think, Rocky, as you said it, I think the biggest thing, it's ironic. It's a paradox, if you will. We're more connected than we've ever been in this time in history. And with that, though, people feel more isolated. And I think there's the pressure that comes with needing to present your best self, right? I have a friend that says you have your representative self and you have the actual self, kind of a thing. He's not a psychologist, but that's just his view of life. And online, right, online you try to look a certain way or to do all of that. And so therefore, it kind of creates this isolation. The article, Lori, that you mentioned that talks about the first article that said the clinician that was saying really community is important. Even in the field of human resources, it's what I do in my profession. I find it's the same thing. And what we were sharing in church this morning is that need for connectedness. Right. And so, again, the paradox is we should be the most connected technologically we are, but in terms of human beings and how God designed us, we're probably further away from that than we've ever been.
Right. So why is that? Like when you're dealing with people day to day, why is that gulf there?
I think the biggest thing is it comes from, I think the gulf is there back to what people feel like that they're supposed to be representing. So even in the world of corporate, those of you that work in corporate situations, you'll run into personalities and you're thinking, my goodness, they seem like they have it all together. And like Lori referred to in the article, you'd probably be surprised to find out that there's something that they're struggling with. Journey. A good friend of mine, he uses that term in the Christian sense, and I've learned to use it more over the years as well. It's a journey. And so I think that gulf is there because I think people, that it's how we define success and how we define put togetherness or how we define how things are supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So I think because of that, I think that is why this gulf exists. And as Lori mentioned, the article said there's a stigma. To this day, there's a stigma around mental health. And there are the licensed professional counselor that was mentioned. There's mental health when people think of the extreme stereotype, kind of the asylum type of a thing, or abnormal psychology. But there's a whole other field of work that's it's about life and it's about life skills. And when I say that, so LPCs, licensed professional counselors, they're usually not dealing with the abnormal. So we're not dealing with something physiological. Yeah. They're usually dealing with very good LPCs or helping work through day-to-day life things, right? Which is what we as Christians try to do as well, and working with and having God work with us to manage those day-to-day life challenges like family, jobs, success, whether it's too much or not enough, all of those types of things.
Right. So Christians easily kind of fall into this trap because what we used to call putting on masks in church, right? Thinking that you need to present as a certain thing that everybody expects of you. But it's actually, it goes beyond this. Maybe it's westernized Christianity more, because this is a success-based culture that we live in. And so the performance trap is there. And have we just transferred it over into church, or what do you think?
Absolutely. So number one, it would be interesting if there were studies out there about how other cultures, and probably non-industrialized cultures, how they perhaps what it looks like for them. But you used the word performance trap this morning as well, mm-hmm. and I think that's a good term because I know personally I fall into that in terms of what the performance trap is. But I've always, in my years of being a Christian, I've always found, and I've always say this, I say the church is a representation of the population, right? I can use the same thing for the military. So serving in the military, the folks that are in the military, reservist, active, they're a representation of the general population. Gotcha. And so with the church, as the Bible says, I mean, Jesus says he came for the sick, not for the well. And so people, when they come into the church, they have all the things that come with them. And so, and I think you had said that's where the church can be valuable to help folks work through that. But yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the fact that the statistics that Lori shared about the pastors, that's sad to hear, but it also very respectfully, it doesn't surprise me either that pastors are struggling with that, because it's like, it's like being a celebrity. If you're a pastor, it's similar to being a celebrity, right? Because you're on stage, folks are looking at you at whatever level that is. So maybe it's not a Hollywood level, but at some level you're like that. So the pressure to present, all put togetherness is there.
Yeah, even to pull off a simple service, sometimes I think is you feeling the pressure. People expect a certain thing, and just on one given day, and that can be a lot of pressure. But somebody needs to inform my congregation that we're celebrities, because I don't think things like that.
I like to say pastors are people too.
Right, exactly. That's true, Lori.
Yeah, jump in here, Lori. You can, if you got a question or just a comment or anything.
No, it's just that, I'm sure pastors put expectations on themselves, but we as churchgoers, sometimes expect them to be perfect, We expect them to practice what they preach, and without realizing that they're just like us, and we're just like them in a lot of ways. So, they have the same struggles, just like Jesus had when he was in the flesh, had same struggles. Of course, he didn't sin like we did, but he understands, right?
Yeah, it is kind of a lot of pressure there. Just on the other hand, there's a responsibility there, to lead and to be an under shepherd under Jesus' authority. So I guess I'm trying to get to that. Like, how do we help people? There's so many Christians today that have just fallen away from the mainstream Christian churches. And to the point where I actually, most of the time, I tell people, don't just go to a mainstream church. You've got to actually try to find places to fellowship where people really, they really love Jesus. They really endorse, growing in your spiritual growth and scriptural study and things like that. Not just going to church.
Right.
But so the further down this road you go, the bigger these issues become, it seems to me like. So we're just trying to be helpful today to help people who are struggling with something, know that they're not abnormal, and that they can recover, and that this is what Jesus has for you. Jesus would touch us supernaturally and does at times do that, but he also dealt with people very practically. Just being there, showing the love of God. I mean, that's the main thing. And so we wanted to bring on Joel today just to see what kind of practical principles we might be able to convey to people, as you started off doing. So what else? What are your other thoughts, Joel?
Yeah, I'm going back to the article that Lori mentioned, and it's true. I think it's really an imperative in a church setting. But as you saw in the article that Lori mentioned, even in the, if you will, to use the term, the non-church setting, community is key. And so in all the things that I've done, both academically, in my walk with God, is having that community. So it's finding whatever that is, as you said. So it's not just the main event at a particular church per se. Those are important. Mm-hmm. But I shared with your congregation this morning, I've joined a men's group. We're doing a book study. We've all known well, actually, let me take that back. Some of us have known each other for a long time. Okay. I'm meeting some new guys that I've not known before that have come through other ways, but it's a buddy of mine that I've known for 20 years. And he felt impressed of the Lord to walk through this book that he selected. And he said that he handpicked, there's only 10 of us, and he did that on purpose, right? And the smaller group allows us to create an environment of approachability. Yeah. And the thing that I would say is that we need to have, with each other, we need to let each other know that it's okay to say, I'm struggling. Those words alone. As I shared with your congregation, I said, look, I'm going to share stuff with you today that I have not figured out. And that's kind of the point. The point is, I'm not all polished and buttoned up here telling you, oh, I've got the way, right? But it's more, I think, with what you said, Rocky, about that connectedness paradox. I have a very good group of friends. I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate to have that. That's been built over several years, that they are my go-to. So when it gets really bad and I'm facing those depressing thoughts or failing thoughts, am I good enough, all of that stuff, they're the ones that I trust. I've chosen them carefully, and I trust that they're not going to misuse that or misrepresent that. But they're the ones that I go to with anything from a simple prayer of encouragement, or I need some words of encouragement. And one of my buddies just did that on my way up here, this week. And I just sent him a note, and his text was maybe 3 sentences, but I've read that several times, and it made the difference. And it helped me to move away from that stigma of, well, you can't say that because you should be a stronger Christian.
So you're a vice president, and if I'm hearing you right, you're saying you've got at least 2 small groups in your life.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So you've got your friends that you've built community with, and then you're in a men's Bible study of people that are similar in career to you.
Right.
And you guys are helping each other. Just take steps at a time.
Right. And I think the thing with that, so some of these guys that I look up to, and to just hear some of the things like Lori was saying, what the article says, just to hear them go, man, this thing is tough for me, or this might be like, in my head, I'm like, wow, I wouldn't think that's tough for you because I look up to you in that area.
Right.
And I can still look up to them in that area. But it's nice to know. But that's that whole, I was listening to a sermon a couple of weeks ago that said vulnerability, it's the one thing we don't do well as people. Right.
Right.
And what we do is we turn it into a joke. Right. So we make our, whatever, your Facebook profile, your Instagram profile, right? We put up just the good stuff, right? No one posts, hey, I'm having a bad day, I need prayer. Because if they do, everyone's like, oh, everyone gets kind of nervous.
Nobody wants to see that.
And everyone like hides the timeline for a while. But that's the thing that's really needed. So where I think what I try to do as well, both being, a follower of Jesus and being someone who works in the human resources field, is I try to be that. I try to be that for others, but I've got to learn to receive that. So this men's group, I didn't want to join it. And my buddy said to me, and it's funny because I told him, I said, I'm too busy. I said, like everybody else, I've got too much going on. And he walks up to me at one of his son's football games, hands me the book anyway. And I said, I can't do the group right now. Too much going on. He goes, I know. And he said, I just want you to have the book. It was completely planned. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, to set you up.
Right. And then, but I really felt like God was like, you know what? That would be really good for you.
Yeah.
And not for me to go talk about my wisdom, but for me to receive from others.
Just to get in that setting.
That's exactly right. And so we meet every other week. We're all very busy. Everyone has careers. Everyone has kids. But every other Monday, we come together for an hour and a half, and we're just honest.
Yeah.
And it's not pour out your heart, your bleeding heart. And, there are group rules. My background is psychology. You have group dynamics rules. You don't share stuff outside of it. But I'll tell you, I look forward to it now. And I actually had to miss one because I was sick last week. And I was so bummed because I missed that connection with those guys, and it's a new community for me to learn from. So not just my core community of friends, but I think community is the big word. That's what people are missing.
So you've got to get out into places where you can be free to be yourself and grow without being guilted, shamed, right? By other people who maybe haven't realized, that people are people.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing things like that too. Like we're doing a Bible study here, just a small Bible study, just for a group of believers that are a little bit more tuned into becoming disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is so much smaller is bigger today.
Right.
I like to say that a lot, and I think that's true with the church in general. Smaller is bigger. You got to get in a smaller setting to be able to do these things. And I think recovery is what Joel is telling us. Recovery is one of those things that really you could talk about it, but it won't really happen unless you're in that type of setting.
Right.
Lori, what are you thinking today?
Oh, definitely agree. I would just say that finding those small groups that you can really have an atmosphere of trust is not an easy thing to do.
Joel talked about this morning, just kind of stepping back and taking a look at the bigger picture. And Lori and I have been talking about that in some of these recent programs. And you were talking about it from a little bit different angle, but concerning this kind of thing, you said it's really important.
Yeah.
To make sure you get the bigger picture.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the bigger picture is, and real quick to what Lori said as well, I would encourage folks as they try to find that community, they need to choose it carefully because, my close group of friends, we've been friends for 20 years. And so, and we've been through the fire together. We've been through the mud together. They've seen me at my worst. I've seen them at their worst. So if we wanted to rat each other out, we could have a lot of dirt on each other, but but that's where, when it gets hard, that's who you want with you, right?
So maybe it's a good thing for people to know right away that, listen, we all have dirt.
Oh, absolutely.
It gets dirty and muddy.
Right.
Right. So a lot of people, I think, are avoiding the recognition of that, to admit that.
Right.
That I can't have dirt.
Right.
But we can. We need to be honest like that.
I was just reading an article actually before coming down here that someone had posted. It was someone, they were talking about aging parents, and I have that going on right now, and I'm grateful to have my parents. And she lost both her parents before she was 15.
Okay.
And one of the things she said in her article, which kind of fits with what we're talking about, is she said, it's okay if you're not okay when this happens. And I think it's that honesty there. So yes, so you don't have to have the perfect wife, the great career, all those things that we aspire to. That's what we see as successful. In the church world, for the pastors, it's going to be whatever those things might be. For me, as I look at that, I might think, well, a pastor needs to have a big church. A pastor needs to have kids that are all put together, and they don't, and I, being in school and stuff like that, I've been around a lot of pastors' kids, and that's a lot of pressure on the family as well of the pastor.
Certain skill sets and stuff that one guy doesn't have all the skill sets of anything.
Right. But that's what we want. I think Lori said it well. We look for that because we look for that in our celebrities as well. Yeah. We want our celebrities to be great. And then it's funny because human nature is funny because we want them to be great, but we're the first to jump on the bandwagon when something scandalous comes out or something bad comes out, right? And we've become, personally, this is the world according to Joel. I think I used to say one of the worst things we created was 24-hour news cycles. Yeah. But then the next thing I think is that we created is all this reality TV, right? Yeah. You watch these shows and that's what people think success is supposed to be like. And I'm not going to disparage any show, but it's supposed to look like this. It's supposed to act like this. And so what people are longing for is they're longing for truth. And they're longing for to be known. So as Lori said, when you're finding that group, it's something you want to choose carefully, and it's something you develop over time. You don't just check into a group at Starbucks and go okay, and then you pour everything out, right? Because that's probably gonna not build that trust.
Well, or it might hurt. You get hurt even worse,
right? And then you get further away from community because you got burned.
Well, when I say, listen, don't just jump into mainstream Christianity today, I say that because I know it has so many danger points. And from anything from not even preaching the gospel to just maybe being a dangerous relational environment. You know what I mean? We're just all so broken today. But it's not easy for somebody to hear that. I think I know what that means, but I think when somebody maybe hears, well, how do I find even 2 or 3 people that I can trust? I mean, what does that take?
Well, in the church setting, so we've seen that evolve over the years. When I became a Christian, it was cell groups, right? That was the term that was used. Then we moved to kind of life groups. Now kind of one of the things that we find more is kind of house churches. Yeah. So there's a main church that's connected to that. So I'm from Tulsa, so I've seen some of those there. They're still connected, so you have that because there's value in that, right? There's value in that accountability and and having some sense of structure. But these house churches are really, in my mind, they're kind of the next evolution of what we know as cell group
back
or
to the beginning,
right? Exactly. But what it is, it's the number, right? Yeah. It's the number. It's probably 15 or less, and it's the same thing in corporate America. Yeah. Lori knows this as well, in terms of her occupation. Yeah. Those smaller groups, you're more effective as a team, right? If you have too many folks, then you're probably not getting a lot done. If you have too few of folks, you're missing key skill sets to help get the project across the finish line. That's a corporate example. But in the church, I think these types of things. So the question of how is to seek those out and to find out if you're at a church to ask, what types of things they have. It could be a men's group. It could be, a mixed group over a book. It could be topical. A lot of life groups, the big thing with life groups was to start with things people enjoy doing. So the church I attended, we had a motorcycle riding group and a cooking group. And at first you might be like, well, that sounds not like that's going to be a Bible study. Oh, well, it's not, but it's starting to build relationships because the way you get to know someone is to spend time with them, right? And so in the church setting, it's a shaking of the hand, which I love. I love Sunday mornings and love doing it at the church today. Folks I haven't seen in years. In my church, we do it too. But while that's great, but even that can be a connection point. The person that sits behind you in church, there's this wonderful family that sits behind me. And I forgot to tell you this. So this guy, Richard, tells me he knows all about Rick Renner. I'm like, I know Rick Renner. I'm like, I grew up on Rick Renner. Personally, and I'm like, but his kids all go to TU, so that's our connection point. So I've actually had just great conversations with them, and through that, you might find that might be an invitation to say, hey, I just, we sit, next to each other in church. Would you like to go out and get lunch sometime? I'd love to hear more about what you do or what your journey's been with God. I think it's some of that, and it's taking those first simple steps.
So you've got to be forward. So the way you would find a church in the old days, you're saying, listen, why don't you try to find people?
Yes.
Why don't you just go? But you got to be willing to go through the process of, I may go through many people and not find, the right group.
Fit. Right.
I think it especially today because of this principle, this umbrella that we're talking about where we're all connected, but we're isolated. You got to know that's true.
Right.
And so you kind of shield yourself a little bit. I am probably going to get hurt or you know what I mean? But people have to start somewhere. But I like what you're saying because I think smaller is bigger today.
Absolutely.
It's better to go and do that in a small group than it is in a big church because we can both wear masks in a big church.
Right.
We're both faking each other out on Sunday morning. Hi, my name's Rocky. Your name's Joel. I mean, what is that?
Right.
But in a house or in a small setting, it's much easier to connect quicker, to find out, what people are about quicker.
Right, and I think the concept of any types of groups in a church, whatever, a Bible study, a life group, a house church, that concept it promotes. It's still a little uncomfortable the first time. It's like going to school for the first time,
Sure.
right? So it's like it's the first day you're trying to figure out, who's where, who are the popular kids, who are the art kids,
Yeah.
that kind
We're
of stuff.
all defensive,
right? So
Yeah.
but you're putting as my friend says, you're putting your representative self forward, which isn't bad.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's not enough. And what these articles are telling us is that's not enough. It's not enough in the general population, and it's clearly not enough for our pastors. While I want my pastor to be awesome, I want my pastor to be real.
Yes.
And the pastor of the church I've been going to for many years, he shared. We have a Celebrate Recovery program in our church, and he shared off the pulpit some of his stuff. In other churches, they'd be like, "Ugh, I need to find somewhere else to go."
Yeah.
But his honesty, it encourages other people to do the same.
Yeah.
And so even if you're someone, so I think those groups could be really helpful. So finding a group that, whether it's doing something like a Bible study or a book, you might be attracted to a group because they're studying a book or an author that you like. I always talk about authors when I come. I always talk about, hey, here's what I'm
Sure.
reading. Here's the music I'm listening to. I love this. Today I talked about the Stephen Curtis Chapman song.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it's going to take a little bit of forwardness. It's going to take a little bit of risk. And as you said, the key that I have to remember is not every relationship is going to be BFFs. I'm not going to connect, but that's not bad either. And that's okay. Maybe this person that sits next to me in church, we're church buddies.
Yeah.
But
Don't
maybe
look for that right away. That's almost too much pressure.
Yeah, exactly. But we may also find out that, man, he's been through something that I would love his insight on.
Yeah. Well, Jesus is all of our BFF.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's where we're losing the point that we all have in common. He's the God.
Right.
And if we can coalesce around him, but we tend to just know that, but not have an experience of that.
Well, I think we've industrialized that again. Jesus. If you look at how Jesus did it, how did he do it? He did it with 12 people, and think about how much time he spent.
Considered backwards people in some ways.
Right. Yeah. And he picked the ones that nobody else picked. Yeah. Right. I mean, he picked the other kids that nobody wanted for kickball. Right. So,
that's right.
They always tell you in the military, always take the assignment nobody wants.
You can't kick. He'll pick it.
Yeah. Exactly. But I think the model we have, that's how Jesus did it. He did it by looking at those, and again going through. And I love the Bible because you get so much out of it. As I was sharing with the group this morning, I've read these scriptures. For 30 years, I've been a Christian, but I'm like, oh, I didn't see this before. And that's the beauty of the Word of God, is you get that out of that. So looking at Jesus' model, it's making that first handshake at church, or it's deciding to step into a church. Yeah. And that may take a bit too. You may not find right, in Tulsa, we've got lots of them. They're all great. And I've been to several over my lifetime, and I've found one for different stages of my life as well. And I think, but I think that's what people are seeking, I think. And even people who don't know Jesus or have a church background, they're looking for something genuine. They're looking for connectedness.
Yeah. You gave us 3 points this morning that I think would be good here too. Perspective, timing, trust.
Yes.
Right? Talk about that.
Yeah, so in short, I feel like for me in my walk with God, He's shown me. I use the English term of synthesis, and synthesis is taking multiple ideas and putting them together. And in walking with Jesus, I'm like, these are the things right now that I'm working through that I've not mastered. But perspective, right? Perspective changes everything. In a split second, something can look really awful or something can look really good. You've heard the adage, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. Yeah. Then the Lord has shown me, once you recognize your perspective, and if it's His perspective, then the next thing is timing, right? I want everything done now. Yeah. I'm very efficient. Things that are not efficient, I don't have time for. But God doesn't work that way,
And seems inefficient.
Right. And most of the time to me, I'm like, God, this is not efficient. And I'm like, I really wish you'd get your act together.
He's got all the time in the world.
Exactly.
We don't.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
So, but that timing piece allows where then you allow that perspective then starts to unfold. And that's why I mentioned the Stephen Curtis Chapman song this morning, Glorious Unfolding. A buddy of mine mentioned that to me. Yeah. I was having a hard day. And he's a buddy I've known for 27 years. He said, bro, I want you to go home. I want you to download this song and listen to it. Yeah. I said, okay. I did. And I meditate on that song almost daily. And then that final piece is the one I struggle with the most, and that's trust, right? Do I really trust that God's going to come through? That applies to relationships too. We have
to say yes.
You have to say yes.
I mean, but we feel like I have to say yes. Yes. I can't tell anybody I don't trust.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. So we think as Christians, well, of course I trust God. Well, if I'm being honest, 90% of the time I don't.
I know.
I mean, I just don't.
It's that old nature in us that creeps up. He doesn't trust God at all.
Right. I'm like,
Right.
And it's the same in relationships, right? I have to trust that the person that I'm going to choose to enter into a friendship, into into whatever that might be, a mentorship. I've got to trust them. So those three things is really what I'm currently growing in right now. And as I said to the group this morning, text me if you got ideas on how to do this, because I'm not great at it. But to me, I felt like the Lord wanted me to share. I think we all grow by hearing other people's parts of their journey. Yeah. And so, as I mentioned, nothing wrong with it. But as a young Christian, when guest speakers would come either to church, or I went to Oral Roberts University, and you don't want them not to look put together, but they look so put together, and you get this idea in your head, oh my goodness, this person's arrived. Yeah. And then you find, and then the sad thing is we find in the church, which is why I think most people kind of shake their heads in disdain, really, is then this big scandal comes out, and we find out that they were depressed, or they had an addiction, as was mentioned in the article.
They're scared to tell anybody.
Yeah, and the reality, as Lori said, I agree with Lori, that pastors are people too, right? They came somewhere, they accepted the Lord too, but they have all stuff. They have wounds that were given to them that they didn't want. And so how do we begin doing that? We begin doing that by starting somewhere and really realizing, again, it's a journey, right? And even though, again, another cliche, it's not just a destination, it really is a journey of faith.
A lot of Christians today are seeing the negatives in the church, seeing the problems, and then blaming the church, kind of just in this generic term. But what I'm hearing today, and what I believe is that we have to take the responsibility ourselves and say, okay, what can I do about it? I can't do anything about whatever condition the church is in, or what kind of people are leading the church. What can I do about that? But I can do something between me and Jesus, and then just the few. Jesus said it's the two or the three.
That's right.
Wherever they're at, that's where I'm at. So it's our own misunderstanding. Right. We think he's out there in the big, the successful, the exciting, but he's really here with me and you and Lori today. This is where he's at.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the Bible talks about, and it's fun, the old adage they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Moses had the same problem, right? Like, you talk to God. We want kind of the industrialized big mega situation over here, because we
want to be Egypt.
Yeah. So because we want to go back to that. But Jesus, he did it by two or three. My dad always says that Jesus Christ was the greatest multi-level marketer ever.
That's true.
And I'm like, that makes good sense, Dad. My dad was a big multi-level marketing guy. But to your point, it's that idea of, and the Bible just talks about it over and over again, where two or more are gathered. The upper room was a group, and yes, the groups grow, and that's what, but to your point, whatever that is in your life, in my life, whatever my sphere of influence is, mine happens to be a lot in corporate. Yeah. So even though in corporate, you can't necessarily I can't overtly say Jesus, but I can be Jesus to other people and how I respond. Yes. The greatest compliment I get, being in the world of human resources, you always hear horror stories. Everyone has one. Oh, my HR person, I told them something and they told everybody. But my team knows. I'm like, you're not the no police, and you are to be approachable, and it's the most important thing to them, so it's the most important to you. Right. And the greatest compliments I get is when someone calls me and says, in the company, and says, hey, Joel, you're the one I trust. Can I ask you blah, 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 blah. But I've had to earn that, right? Yeah. I've had to earn that trust. And I think the church, we're missing that, because we're all trying to figure out if we can trust each other. Yeah. So we're just kind of running around in some ways. That's not bad. I just think, but it's got to start, instead of trying to do it, like you said, Rock, this big, where can I start here? What about the people that sit around me in church, or the small group that I'm a part of, or the outreach that I, participate in? Food banks. I love. We have a lot of great organizations that I love to be a part of. So we have a John 3:16 mission, which is Christian based. We have a food bank. I was talking to Bobby before about we have a youth services that reaches out to homeless youth. Military organization, whatever that is for you, whatever your passion is, then you're going to find other people with like passion, and you can start to develop and cultivate that community.
Action groups are good places to start to build relationship, because you have that in common.
Yeah. That's exactly
what you feel like God put in you to do. That's a really good place to start. The whole gospel kind of hinges on this. Jesus, like I read here in the beginning, he came to set people free, to bring deliverance, to bring the recovery that they need, the freedom that they need. And generally, I like that verse 19, to open up a time of acceptance and say, listen, God's accepting you. You're not rejected. So I wanted to have a program here in the beginning of the year where we could just, tell people that. Listen, you may have experienced some hurt, but you're not rejected. He hasn't forgotten about you. He's still there, and his blood is still just as effective. What he's done is just as real, and will work for you today just like it did maybe back when you first met him. Mm-hmm. So, Lori, you got any other thoughts for Joel before we wind it up today?
No, just that I was just thinking as you guys were talking that Jesus himself had a small group, right?
That's good.
Peter,
Yeah.
James, and John, and in the garden, and he frequently brought those few together, and there's probably, I'm guessing, a greater level of trust, or maybe he got encouragement from them, or what have you. I don't know, but what you were saying about just being Jesus to others. The amazing thing is we have him living inside of us. So we have all of the power that he gives us inside of us to bring to bear on the situations we run into with other people when we're trying to help them, or, in those small group situations. So, so that, we've got this treasure right inside. So it's amazing.
You just reminded me of something, Lori, that I want to share. That's really helped me a lot. Being able to share Jesus with everyone. So everyone knows when you go to the store, if you're at Target or Walmart, or you're at a restaurant, it's how are you? And what does everyone always say? They say, oh, how are you today? What does everyone always say?
Yeah, fine, good.
Fine, good,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. So I've learned over the years, I've changed that question. And what I ask every time I interact with somebody, I try to do this, whether I'm online at Target or I'm in a restaurant, and I say, how is your day going? Very different.
Right.
And so,
I noticed you say
because
that.
you get a more honest answer, because they'll be like, good, they might give you the fake answer, or they're like, my shift just started, or, and I have found, for me, the Lord has really helped me to see that. And then whenever I go to a restaurant, because I was a server for 8 years, and I think everybody should have to work with the public at some point, because you'll learn how to be patient. But I always get their name. And I learned that from my buddy Mark, and that guy has never met a stranger. And even in those 3 minutes, you can start connectedness with someone who's not connected. And then if you frequent a place, then you get to know that individual, and then you can start, so tell me more. So we were out to lunch yesterday, right? And we got to talk to our waitress, and she told us she was going to dental school, how long she'd been working at this restaurant. And and I truly believe that was a God connection. And for us doing so to what Lori was saying, I mean, we have Jesus inside of us. And even if you don't say Jesus right off the bat, you're for those places that you patron, that you get to see those individuals more and more. That absolutely. My group of friends, we go to McAllister's, and I don't think you have those in Northeast. But
a restaurant.
Yeah. So we go there every Sunday. And one of the managers, she was a single mom, and we got to know her over time, and we actually brought over baby gifts for her, and we have a relationship with her. And and the goal was just to find out about her. And we believe that is certainly opening up seeds of opportunity, for that. But I think what Lori was saying is just to remember that we are Jesus to other people. And a simple extra 3 minutes at the register, God can do something with that.
That's good, Joe. Lori and I have been talking about how Paul went into the deepest, darkest pagan cities of the Roman Empire and brought the gospel. And when we read it, it seems like, although we see all the tribulations he went through and the suffering, it seems almost effortless. People just were like, can this be real? We want this. Yeah. And it's because of the presentation of who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where this topic kind of has to settle back to that's ground zero. It's like, if you know Jesus, you understand that, you're never in a place where he's not there for you, and where he can't pick you up and bring you forward. Mm-hmm. And then he can use you, because that's what he's trying to tell everybody. So I just think sometimes we're looking at, we get our eyes on, we're in the forest and we're in the church, and we're like, oh man, this is all messed up. But I'm like, let's just bring it back to Jesus, and then Jesus and me and you, and then Jesus and me, you and Lori, and then keep it simple and let him do what only he can do. Yeah. And I think that's the big, kind of the hidden secret that's out in the open, that people don't remember.
But I think if we can learn to do that, it's funny because you had said, I use the term in the corporate world, less is more. I always tell, whenever I preach, whenever I'm doing something in the corporate world, less information is more, because people need time to digest it. Yeah. But also, like you said, I was just thinking at the Target that I frequent by my home, there's a gentleman named Wayne. He's from the East Coast. Yeah. What a story he's got. I was going first thing in the morning. There's nobody ever there on the register. So we visit almost every, I'm like, Wayne, how's it going? And he used to have a business up here in New York. He was an entrepreneur, but he wanted to be closer to his kids. So he's moved to Tulsa. And my goodness, that's not by accident
that you met him.
Yeah. And so, and he says hi to me, I say hi to him. And like other people are kind of uncomfortable by it. They're like, this is uncomfortable. Why is the customer, but right. That's what's sad about our society, right? People think I don't know what they think, but for that, but situations like that, like I've just found, I mean, and I feel like Jesus is like, man, that's an opportunity. Yeah. It's an opportunity for you. Just find out about him.
Absolutely.
And then use that, and God will work with that and then he asks me, well, so Joel, what do you do? Oh, well, and then I can tell him, oh, well, this is that, and this is what I've learned. Sure. And I just think that to me for me has become kind of that, maybe an expanded definition of kind of the evangelistic, mission that we have.
Sure.
And I think they used to call it friendship evangelism years ago. But
it's good, Joel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Yeah.
I appreciate you and Lori kind of sharing your white collar professional view on this subject. I'm just a blue collar pastor, and so I feel privileged to be hanging out with you guys. So anyway, this is a good topic, and maybe we'll continue this more, and we'd like to have you back on sometime.
Thank you.
So thanks for being with us. All right, Lori, you can tell people what they need to know as we go out today and take it from there.
Yeah, if you like this video, please like it and share it, and subscribe to this channel. Hit the little bell there to get notified of updates. You can find Rocky Veach on Twitter at Rocky Veach, or on Facebook if you do a search for Rock the World. And then, of course, Rocky's website is rockyveach.org, where you can find a wealth of spiritual growth materials. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.